Welcome. For those of you that don't know us, I'm Lee Biggenden. I'm the co-founder and COO of a company called Nephos Technologies. Thanks for joining us this evening. Hopefully, not everyone's not too fragile after last night. But I'm going to be talking you through, giving you a bit of an introduction into us this evening. A little bit about where we're seeing the market generally when it comes to file storage in particular. And we're also joined by Kevin and Mark from Nasuni, who are going to be introducing their platform and having a little bit of a conversation with you about how that fits in when it comes to file storage. And we're also joined by Lee, another Lee, Builtin from the Saltair Brewery. So Lee's going to be walking through the virtual brewery tour with you a little bit later. I'll start with a little bit about us, just to give you some background, really. So we're a relatively young company in many respects. We've been going for nearly 9 years now. And really, we're a consulting-led systems integrator, if you like. And a lot of our work and our core focus is trying to help our customers to solve kind of complex data problems. And that can really range from anything from replatforming genome sequencing to cloud migration to data governance to machine learning pipeline and anything in between. Very consulting led in our approach. A lot of the work that we do is helping customers to kind of navigate and move from where they are now to where they're trying to get to. So a lot of our work starts there, but it often transitions through. So not only do we do that kind of engagement or work through that kind of engagement, we also work with clients to provide technical design, implementation services, project management, and then ongoing management of those services thereafter. We're very, very focused in what we do, and we're very, very good at saying no when we can't do something. I think the combination of those things is what's led to kind of our growth rate, really. So we have a compound growth rate of over 700% over the last 3 years in terms of revenue. And that's led us to be picked up by the FT. So we're in the top 25% fastest growing companies in Europe, according to them. And we have a really high customer retention rate as a result. So as well. So, anywhere upwards of 98%. And normally the only way we lose a customer is if they've been acquired or they've had a wholesale change in direction. So, that's led us to kind of work with a number of customers. The thing that's common across all of them, and there's obviously some brands on there you'll probably recognize, but what's common across all of them is this need to better manage, store, process, protect data. So if you look at the education and research sector as an example, two of our key customers there, one in particular is Genomics England, where we've replatformed 70, 80 petabytes worth of genome sequencing data, as well as redesign and re-architect the way they run HPC, for example. So, we've got quite broad experience, I would say, across the piece. But the thing that's common across everyone really is this desire to get more out of their data set. I'm going to touch a little bit on where we see that market generally, and some of the trends, some of the issues that we see when it comes to storage, and particularly file storage. Now, I think historically people have compromised, right? It's been a case of right data, wrong place for a lot of people. If you look traditionally, people would have pushed through and initially gone with the kind of all flash array SAN type environments, really super expensive, really high performance, hard to scale, and also not very good for file. It's kind of the wrong dynamic for a file workload, right? It's really good for virtual, but you don't need that level of performance when it comes to file workload typically, unless it's in a HPC environment. People kind of move down from there to your NAS systems, the NetApps of this world, and really, really good for file, not great for block, not great for those virtual workloads. But people have compromised, right? They've either put file on those high performance systems, Or conversely, they've taken something like a NAS environment, shoved it full of SSD, and they're leveraging that to support their virtual environment. Either way, there's compromise. Now, I would say more commonly, or more latterly rather, the advent of object or cloud storage becoming more prevalent as well has really given us a new dynamic there. It gives us infinite scale. It gives us super, super low cost. And that's whether you're on premise or in one of the web scale hyperscalers. And it gives us real durability over our data sets. But the problem is you've got no feature set, no enterprise feature set, right? You've got no file system associated to that. So actually leveraging that for use cases outside of being a long-term backup target can be quite challenging. And that's actually one of the reasons why we've got the guys at Nasuni on, because they really blend that infinite scale that you get with object and cloud storage, but with a file system front end, so users actually know what they're doing with it. But Kevin will explain more about that in a bit. Now, as I say, bear in mind, we're not really talking about HPC specifics. I know some of you will have research on HPC environments, but we're not really touching on that today. We're looking more at that kind of traditional file storage landscape, if you like. If we look at the traditional environment, as I mentioned, we kind of got that competing dynamic of cost versus performance versus scale. But we've also got massive inefficiencies in the way that traditional storage works. So when we look at this with customers, quite often we'll find that they'll be storing at least 5x the amount of data that they actually need. It makes it really difficult to scale, and it makes it really expensive. And in a world where we're all trying to reduce costs, reduce complexity, be more dynamic about coping with the sheer mass and volume of data that we're developing, that becomes really difficult and a bit of an inhibitor. Now, the reason that typically people will have 5x the amount of data that they actually need is because we're looking to protect our data through replication and duplication. You know, technologies like RAID that you've probably got in place today. We'll have our primary storage, our tier one storage. We'll be running backup systems. We'll have test and dev environments. But even just on file data alone, if you look at the fact that you'll have a primary NAS system or a primary file storage, almost certainly replicated to a secondary system, you'll be backing that up and protecting it, pushing it onto some other medium, whether that's tape or whether that's being pushed into something like AWS Glacier or whatnot. You know, the combination of those things leads us to store way more data than we need. And that compounds the problem that we've got when it comes to trying to scale these things out. So not only are we trying to scale an environment, we've also got to face the commercial impacts of having something that's inefficient. So one of the other things that we quite often see, particularly in the education space, is also a challenge around data retention. Quite a lot of customers find that they're storing data for way longer than they need to be, which again just causes that infrastructure system to bloat, really. So again, quite a common issue for lots of customers out there. So what we try and do is something a little bit different. We want to try and simplify that model, right? What we try and advocate is a model based on object storage, effectively. We want to leverage an object storage tier. So whether that's on-premise object from the likes of Cloudian or Scality or EMC's ECS platform, Quantum, whatever it might be. We want to leverage that object storage platform, or it could be one of the public cloud providers, so AWS, Azure, GCP. We want to leverage that object store to support multiple use cases. And when we look at the file data set in particular, quite often, probably 20%-ish will be hot. The rest of it, for all intents and purposes, will be archived. So again, we don't need to store that on premium grade spinning disk that is super fast and super performant, because actually we just don't need it. So what we look to do is offload that file data into an object store and then use Nasuni, you'll notice the word here, edge cache, is effectively to leverage Nasuni to provide that file access to your users, snapshot data down into the object store to provide the level of protection that you need. That's the use case that Kevin's going to speak to you about shortly. But the purpose of doing that is that, one, we remove replication and duplication of data. We're leveraging erasure-coded object storage to give us the scale and durability of the environment that we want, without the need to replicate and duplicate data, without the need for RAID. And we're doing it in a caching model that is more suited to the profile of our data. So it all ends up, we're looking to try and drive efficiency in that environment. And what we'll talk about a little bit later on is an example use case and some numbers that might bring that home. So I think that's any questions on that at this point? There is mud, there is beer. Okay. And if not, I'm going to hand over to Kevin.
Thank you. So, hello everyone. My name is Kevin Moxey. I'm the regional sales manager here at Nasuni. Thanks for your time this evening. Hope, as Lee's already said, hope your heads aren't too sore from last night. But over the next 10-15 minutes, I'd like to take you through the advantages of moving from a traditional on-premise file infrastructure to a file storage platform that's been built for the cloud. So the challenges we see today are driven mainly by data growth. There's an estimated 40 zettabytes of data today. That's 40 trillion gigabytes, and this is doubling every 2 years. Now, of this, the biggest growth is around file and unstructured data, which is growing around 10 times faster than block. With this increased data sprawl, we see increased distribution of users as well. For example, we're seeing that universities are sharing data more and more with third-party organizations and research institutes. This all leads to increased complexity, and this increased complexity leads to increase in costs. We know budgets are always a challenge. We also know that at the moment, international student numbers are down significantly, which means a huge drop in revenue for universities. So this is having an impact, it's impacting budgets even more. So hopefully this slide will resonate with you. So in a traditional file storage infrastructure, we see lots of silos in multiple locations, which is why this traditional approach, it's not really fit for purpose anymore. So it starts with silos of storage in the data centers. So not just your primary NAS storage, but you also need to take copies of the data. So you need separate backup solutions and infrastructure. So we're talking about backup servers, media servers, backup software itself, disk and tape backup targets. This all adds a lot of complexity. Historically, universities have had a kind of campus environment set up, but more so now than ever. Universities are outgrowing these sites and having to create additional satellite sites. So with these additional sites, you don't have to duplicate the same level of effort. So you need more infrastructure at these sites. We usually see kind of Windows file servers at the edge with either local backup to disk or tape. Maybe you're driving these backups across the network back to the data center, but even so, whatever way you're doing things, this is still adding more cost, more complexity, and more management and administration points. Then you need to think about disaster recovery in case you lose your primary sites. How do the users access the file shares in that event? This means you need standby clusters and infrastructure at other locations. Then it gets even more challenging when you need to start sharing these same files across many locations. Now you're faced with remote access solutions such as VPN, WAN acceleration technologies to boost speeds, MPLS. Universities are becoming much more business driven. So they're creating relationships and links with third-party industries and research organisations. In 2018 to 19, UK universities received almost £5 billion from knowledge exchange activities, which is vital in providing unis with these additional revenue streams. So this approach was kind of fine up until maybe 10 years ago, but with the change in working environments and habits, so the advent of work from home, work from anywhere, virtual desktops, plus the sheer growth of unstructured file data, this approach no longer scales and it's not commercially viable. Ultimately, you're always going to run out of something. be that disk space. You might max out on the number of disks or shelves you can add to an array. You might max out on the controllers. Maybe one site grows faster than another. It's very difficult to move and balance resources between sites after you've already deployed them. So other vendors and some of our competitors have lifted and shifted to run their architectures in the cloud. But ultimately, these still face the same limitations as on-premise architectures. You still need separate backup and restore solutions. You still need technology to synchronize between different locations. You need local hardware, in most cases as well, to provide a good user experience. And again, because this is multiple different products, there's several management points as well. So we think there's a better way of doing things with Nasuni, which stands for NAS Unified. We set out to build a platform that allows customers to really converge all the elements of a file infrastructure. So your primary storage itself, your NAS and file servers, the backup, multiple copies of your data, version control, being able to go back to any version at any point in time quickly, disaster recovery in case a primary site goes down or offline, rapid ransomware recovery, plus even file synchronization across many locations, all in a single platform. We did this by building the first file system to live on object storage, which we call UniFS. Now, Lee's already touched on some of the benefits of cloud object storage, but it's highly available, it's extremely robust, and it's stored in multiple locations, it's infinitely scalable and extremely cost effective. It's all well and good having this information stored in the cloud, but what about access? You need fast access to these files, whether it's a VDI environment, desktop, on-prem or at home. This is where our edge appliances come into play, the cache devices that Lee was talking to. These are lightweight VMs that can be spun up wherever you need access, and they replace your full-size NAS and file servers. They use the same protocols such as CIFS and NFS, so you can still present the same file shares out to your users. And although your data still lives in cloud object storage, 98% of all the user requests come from the cache. And so this gives you the best of both worlds. You get the robustness, the resiliency of the cloud object storage with a local LAN-like experience for the users. Also, because of this caching technology, we minimize charges for egress. Lots of people don't realize that although it's free to put information into the cloud, and you get charged to access it and pull it back again. And so this helps to minimize costs for egress there as well. And this whole environment is managed through a single, easy-to-use front end, and the cloud orchestration platform synchronizes all changes across all locations, including global file locking to prevent version conflict. So the reason why we're growing so quickly boils down to three things: savings, simplicity, and speed. Typically, we see 50% cost savings versus traditional on-premise solutions by employing the economics of cloud object storage at the back end. Nasuni is simple to deploy, migrate, and manage. We've got a net promoter score of 90, a CSAT score of 9.5. Our customers love us. Backup, disaster recovery, rapid ransomware recovery is built in as well. And with Nasuni, we can provide an infinitely scalable capacity for any number of locations. So the built-in data protection, this is all about streamlining and reducing risk. You don't have to have a separate copy of your file data for backup and DR. Nasuni provides better SLAs than can typically be achieved using separate backup copies and replicas in most cases. For example, restores can normally take a long time. Often you need to restore an entire file system before you can do anything with it. With Nasuni, it's extremely granular. You can restore down to the file, the folder, or the share level. And there's no need to do things such as mounting volumes or anything like that. Individual files can be recovered to any global location within minutes. For example, you may not be aware of Pernod Ricard, but they own a number of leading alcohol brands such as Absolute Vodka. They were running a traditional on-premise architecture. They lost a NetApp filer at one of their DR sites, or one of their remote sites, sorry. They were able to rebuild the hardware within a day, but then it took another 3 days to then move back the file system from the cloud. Nasuni, this dropped to an hour to just point the users at the data itself. And because we're using object storage at the back end. We keep every version of a file that can't be modified. So this provides rapid recovery from ransomware, as you can just go back to the last good copy. So by eliminating this siloed infrastructure that kind of we've been used to doing over the years, we see average hard cost savings of 50%. With traditional on-premise architectures, you need to purchase a lot more capacity than you actually need. And you need additional capacity for things like RAID overhead, snapshots, future growth. The lead touched on this earlier as well. With Nasuni, you only pay for what you need when you need it. As we see most growth in file and unstructured data, this is putting more pressure on backup environments. So, I mean, the weekends aren't getting any shorter, so this leaves you exposed if you can't complete your backup jobs. With Nasuni, you no longer need a backup solution for your file data, so you can significantly reduce costs for your backup environment as well. This doesn't include soft costs, such as the reduction in management overhead and the operational efficiencies that can be achieved. Again, with traditional on-premise architectures, you typically go through a refresh cycle every 3 to 7 years. This requires large CapEx spend, which is getting more and more difficult. Also, it needs migration resource to move data between the different platforms. With Nasuni, it's a software as a service subscription, and you don't need to worry about any hardware refreshes in the background. Here's just a few names. You can see leading brands are moving file data to the cloud at scale with Nasuni. We've got over 130 petabytes under management. I think that's now over 150 petabytes. We've got partnerships in place with all the leading hyperscalers. I've mentioned our CSAT score already. Something else, Gartner clients can review some of their vendors on Gartner Peer Insights. Over the past 12 months alone, we've had 17 reviews, which is more than any other competitive product in the cloud file storage space. We've got an average score of 4.8 out of 5. This kind of backs up, customers love us, that they buy more and they expand. The average expansion rate is about 30% year on year. So to wrap up, if this resonates, we'd love to discuss with you in more detail. We're happy to run demonstrations, whiteboard sessions. So please reach out directly or via Nephos to schedule an initial call. But before we wrap up, are there any questions?
Thanks for that, Kev. So I'm just gonna wrap up with a bit of a use case example for you. Before we let the other lead do the more interest, I guess. But yeah. So I'm just going to wrap up with a little bit of a use case example. Now, I mentioned at the top we're quite consulting led. And one of the things that we often end up doing for clients is working through one of our smart services around smart file assessment or our smart data object service. And really, they're all about helping our customers to understand what the current file landscape looks like, where they can streamline, what the strategy could be to leverage this kind of technology and object storage, and then build out a business case and a use case set of use cases around that. Now, it's already a G Cloud approved service. You're shortly going to be able to purchase through AWS Marketplace as well. But that's quite often an area that we start with customers just to understand what they're doing. Now, by way of example, a quick illustration of this, we've taken a 110 terabyte usable environment based on NetApp, based on Veeam for backup. So, relatively cost-effective version rather than a rubric or such. And what we've done is we've extrapolated those numbers out. So from a traditional infrastructure perspective, what we're looking at is 110 terabytes worth of usable, which is about 160 raw, I think, based on that BAS platform, replicated across 2 sites, backed up by Veeam, and then that long-term backup retention into AWS infrequent access. So, relatively cost-effective way of doing that. And managing that infrastructure. And what we've seen from that, though, compared to what we would see, and Kev touched on this in one of his slides, in terms of reducing the overall cost of management of around 70%. And that's based on 1 year. So that doesn't take into account the fact that in maybe 3 or 5 years, depending on what your write-down cycle is, you're going to end up with a forklift upgrade on the traditional approach. If it's a combined environment where you're running block on that as well, you're also going to incur, which isn't in this, the cost of things like fiber channel that you might have in place, you know, all of these other things. The Nasuni platform is designed, and the edge caches are designed to be disposable. So if you take a physical appliance, it's a rebadged OEM Dell R series piece of hardware. They also run on Nutanix AHV if you're a Nutanix shop, Hyper-V, VMware as virtual appliances, or natively in the cloud as a virtual appliance. So you've got a lot of flexibility around the deployment method. So again, we're able to drive a lot of that cost base out as an example. And what we're using here from a Nasuni perspective is a virtualized appliance running on some sort of block platform, which we would assume that you already have in place. We're using the native data protection capabilities and versioning from Nasuni, and we're pushing that into AWS S3 and frequent access. Now, it could be GCP, it could be Azure Blob, it could be on-premise, Cloudian, Fidelity, etc. But the numbers are pretty much the same across the piece. So, so that's a good example of the kind of cost saving that we'd expect to see in real life. Now, Kev's touched on these in terms of next actions. You know, if it does look of interest, if you want a one-to-one, if you want a demonstration of the platform, proof of concept, these sorts of things, we're more than open to doing that with you. I guess that concludes really in terms of the slides, slide element.